Hey, food explorers. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm your host, Colleen. I am here today. I have a rant for everybody. Oh my goodness. You guys, things are bugging me right now, but I wanted to say a few things before I kind of get into my ranty rant. First, sorry about no episode last week. I recorded the episode where we kind of did the retrospective around Canmore and me, looking at all the places, not all the places, but a lot of the places that sort of got me into this food journey and food exploring. And when I tried to make it as just an audio only episode, it made zero sense because I'm like, oh, there's the house I used to live in and look at that right there, beautiful mountain. And I was pointing out stuff pretty much the whole episode. So it would have made zero sense as an audio episode. You would have been like, okay, I can use my imagination, but only so much. So that's why there was no audio episode last week. But this week you get both. So whatever platform you listen to. And then the second thing is we have lots of people listening every week, but we don't have a lot of people subscribed. So hit the subscribe button. Subscribe so that other people can find our podcast. People can only find our podcast if all of you are spreading the word about what we do here every week. I have been booking some guests, and my one guest messaged me back and was like, oh, did I ever tell you about the time? And insert super famous celebrity food person and I went out to dinner. And it's like, no, you never told me this. So stay tuned for that because we're going to have a couple of really fun guest episodes coming up in the next couple of weeks. I was supposed to leave to teach another hospitality course. That's poof, gone into the wind. So it is what it is. I know that this is the way. So today, oh my gosh, everybody, we have to dive into this. It's bugging me. Okay. Recipes, recipe creation. These viral recipes on TikTok that one are not recipes and two do not work. And cookbooks, and gosh, there's just so much to dive into. So if you have ever made a recipe at home and you're like, I followed the directions and why didn't it work? There could be a lot of things going on. Sometimes, and we just, in the article that we just wrote about oatmeal cake, and so Jason's mom's oatmeal cake recipe, it's a fantastic recipe. It's a very cool technique. So that's on our Substack. But to kind of give you a summary, in that recipe, there's a very specific technique that is done to create this super moist, delicious, old-fashioned oatmeal cake. And Jason and I spent a bit of time sort of sleuthing around on the internet to see if we could figure out where the recipe originated, because we figure it was like 1940s, 1950s that it was developed. But Jason's mom's made a lot of improvements and little tweaks over the years so that the recipe turns out great. So this is a perfect example of a recipe that somebody that has made it over and over again has said, yeah, this is good, but if I do this little thing, I'll get a better result. Somebody seeing the recipe for the first time might be like, oh, why would we do, so the recipe calls for the oats, the margarine. Yes, I said margarine. Don't kill me. And the boiling water to be put together. And you cream eggs and sugar together. And so for a lot of people, especially if you're doing baking and stuff, you'd be like, oh, that's weird. Usually the buttery margarine thing would be creamed with the sugar. And this recipe doesn't do that. So I thought that it might be easy to find sort of the historical, where did this recipe come from? Nope, we cannot find it. So the closest thing that we can figure is it might have come from maybe like a church cookbook or back. So I'm going to show on the screen, but if you're listening, I am holding up a cookbook called Our Favorite Recipes. And this is from Lorelei Elementary School, circa 1986. I understand some of you out there are like, I was not born in 1986. I was already around for a while in 1986. But this is one of those recipe books where they basically ask all the parents, like, put a recipe in so we can do this little cookbook and it'll be fun and the kids will have it forever. And I had totally forgot about this cookbook, but I was at my parents' the other day and I was like, yeah, we're trying to find this oatmeal cake recipe and we are just bewildered as to where it came from. Can't figure it out. So my dad actually started going through his old cookbooks. He's very funny because there's an old home economics book that he uses to make his fudge recipe, which we only get on special occasions now because we're not special enough. I don't know. Take it up with him. But the cookbook is actually my mom's from her home ec class. But when I said to Dad, can I peek through that book, he said that it's under lock and key. I wasn't allowed to touch it. So I was like, well, I'll book a time then. How about that? So, but as we were going through that book, and then he found my old Lorelei elementary book, and we were looking through that, and we still couldn't find this oatmeal cake recipe anywhere. But on the internet, we searched old-fashioned oatmeal cake. This was kind of, so we searched by the technique, we searched by the ingredients, we searched by a whole bunch of things. But Jason found one that had similar ingredients, but the person that created the recipe, I don't feel like she's ever actually made this recipe before, because in it, she said to put, and I quote, eggs, butter, sugar, flour, baking soda, and salt in your stand mixer with your paddle and beat the crap out of it. Okay, we're making a cake. So why am I beating the crap out of the flour so that it will start creating glutinous strands and then it's going to turn into a cake? No, I don't think so. So as I was researching that, it started getting my little anxiety nerves going, because I want people to be successful in the kitchen. I don't want people to throw ingredients out because they found a recipe and they thought, oh, I can make this recipe. It's going to be super fantastic. And then it's not. So if you look in recipe books, there's always weird and random mistakes. And I always think to myself, how many editors and proofreaders did this go through that you missed a vital ingredient? And if you're like, oh, Colleen, that hardly ever happens. Oh, friends, no, it does. So just recently, Jason bought me this great cookbook. I'm just going to grab it over here. I love this book very much. Joshua Weissman. I adore Joshua Weissman. I love watching his videos, all of his content on YouTube. It's fantastic. So his brand new cookbook, Taste Over Texture. Let's turn to page 185, and there's a recipe for a lavender creme brulee. And in the ingredients, we have cream, milk, vanilla, lavender, salt, egg yolks, and sugar. Awesome. Great. In the description, there is nowhere to put the sugar. The sugar has been left out of the instructions. So you're like, oh, Colleen, no. That's just one thing. Okay. Brian Johnson. We love Brian Johnson, right? Did a whole video about his Nutty Pudding, our most watched YouTube video right now. Brian Johnson had, the reason I did the video, he had a recipe up on his Blueprint website with ingredients. And then the instructions didn't have some of the ingredients in it. And then there was some stuff in the instructions that was not in the ingredients. And then on his video, it's like, this is how you make it. It was again different. And so I made the video because I was like, okay, everybody, let's parse all the information together and we will come up with a successful recipe. This guy's spending $2 million a year to be the most measured anti-aging man in the world, and the recipe is incorrect. So it happens all the time. When I was looking through this Lorelei elementary school cookbook, I found what is probably one of the worst offenders that I've seen in a while. I'll read you the recipe. The recipe says angel food cake. So you're like, oh my gosh, we're going to make angel food cake. No, you're not making angel food cake. Here's what you're doing. You're buying an angel food cake and you're cutting it in half. Bring juice of 1 can of crushed pineapple to boil. What size a can? Doesn't say. Just bring juice of 1 can. So are we doing 250 mils, 473 mils? Are we doing a liter? I have no idea. We're bringing it to boil. And then we're dissolving a small package of Jell-O in it. Oh, that's also very helpful. Small package of Jell-O. There's many sizes of Jell-O out there, and there's not always just one. Like, I can't buy a box of Jell-O and be like, is the box of Jell-O the small Jell-O size? Or is the box with the 3-pack in it that are smaller sizes individually wrapped, is that the small size? How would I know? How would I know? And then you put a brick, thank goodness they put in brackets, half a liter, vanilla ice cream, and you stir it in until it's melted. Good God, what is this abomination? Apparently, get this is going to thicken up. And you're going to spread it in between the layers of cake. And then you're going to put a half a pint of whipped cream on top. So I just take the whipped cream out of the you guys see where I'm going with this? Whipped cream, if I just take whipped cream, so it comes as cream and it's a liquid in a container, but it just says here, I frost with it. It doesn't say whip it to whipped cream, doesn't say add sugar to the whipped cream to, make sure that it's stiff. It says nothing, just frost it with a half a pint. So basically, if I'm reading this, I'm going to dump the liquidy whipped cream on top of this abomination. But at the end, I'm going to decorate it with mandarin oranges. Or I could use a different type of Jell-O. What is happening here? So let's calm down a bit. I have to calm down. I'm angry about these things because as somebody that's worked in kitchens, that's been a recipe developer for many, many years, again, I want people to succeed. I want you to go into the kitchen and make that beautiful thing. So then this brings me to the TikTok videos. So the newest one that we saw the other day, you take olive oil and you put maple syrup in it, and it amazingly turns into caramel. It doesn't. I watched this video and I was like, 100% this is not going to work. So I wasted some maple syrup and olive oil. Sorry, Jason, I wasted it. Guess what happens when you take an oil and a sugar? They don't combine to become caramel. So the video is faked, which also makes me mad. It does not work. You basically have an oil slick in a bowl with the oil sitting on top of the maple syrup. It does not come together. It's very frustrating. But then all these people are like, oh my God, this is the best recipe. But then people keep reposting this garbage. Stop reposting these things that are literally not going to work, 1. And 2, they're pretty, it's gross. I love olive oil. I drink straight up olive oil, but this was an abomination as well. I don't know if it's as bad as this angel food cake disaster over here. As I was flipping through here, I also found a recipe and it was like, take chicken and put ketchup and something else on top of it and cook it. I was like, oh, I don't want ketchup on my chicken. It's very strange. So we have the Dubai chocolate bar. Oh my gosh, everybody go and make the Dubai chocolate bar. So chocolatiers are freaking out right now because they're like, I have to make the Dubai chocolate bar because if I don't, I'm missing out on sales because people are coming to me and being like, you should make the Dubai chocolate bar. First of all, good for you if you are making this chocolate bar. I applaud you. And you're cashing in on sales, and that's fantastic. However, pistachios are like $43 a kilo. Pistachios are super expensive. Pistachio paste is even more expensive. this phyllo pastry that they use to make it crunchy. Phyllo pastry is not that expensive, but you have to process it properly to keep the crunch when you add in the pistachios. And it was really interesting because I was watching Kate Weiser the other day. So Kate Weiser Chocolate, she's in Texas. She is a chocolatier. She's quite famous. She's the one that makes the Carl the Snowman at Christmas time. He's super cute. They did a whole thing where they had to figure out a way to ship Carl the Snowman so that he didn't break. But she even was like, I got to make these Dubai chocolate bars. And she did a couple of videos where she talked about how, you see this bar and you break it open and it oozes out all this pistachio and phyllo pastry filling. And she was like, it's hard for us to find those molds. And, when we're looking at the filling to chocolate ratio, and she did a really interesting video about how they ended up having to use a different mold. So it's not the big giant mold. But she said, like, with that big giant mold, she's trying to make the shell too super thin. She's trying to get enough filling in there. And it was a challenge to kind of try and recreate this viral sensation. For me, no, I'm not making the Dubai chocolate bar. I'm not suddenly going to go out and invest in all of this. First of all, the mold for it, but second of all, like the pistachios and the butter and honest to goodness. Because again, it's a fad, right? I mean, it's going to be around for a little while. People are going to like it. But like we've seen with so many other things that become a fad, they come in and they are out. Basically, as soon as the influencers and the TikTok people forget about them, it's gone. There's actually, we're going to have to research this a bit more, but we're going to do an article coming up soon about like tourism and stuff because, in countries like Italy right now, they're actually having a huge problem with these influencers coming for these viral foods. So there's one where recently in Florence, there's this panini shop that has been just decimated because the influencers decided it was the biggest, best, and greatest thing ever. So we all got to go there. And it's kind of just overrun the community. And a lot of the people that live in Florence, I hope I said Florence because it's Florence, like they don't have spaces for people that live there because they're just overrun with tourists. We were in Banff last week and they got to do something. It's the over tourism is crazy. So that's a little tangent. Let's get back to the recipes. So you create this recipe from a book. Here's the other thing that's a challenge. So say you're creating a recipe and they call for chicken stock and they just say chicken stock. And you're like, well, you know what? I'm a low sodium chicken stock person. So I'm just going to use that instead. Okay, well, now you've removed a huge portion of salt that was in the recipe. So now your recipe, you're going to have to do the fun season to taste. We'll talk about that in a second. But you're going to have to find a way to replace what you've taken out. Maybe you got a recipe and it says chicken stock and you're like, nope, I don't eat chicken. I'm going to put vegetable stock in. So again, now you have changed another component. So it was supposed to be a chicken base. Maybe the chicken base was working with the other ingredients to take that, chicken flavor and put that into your recipe. Now it's vegetables and you're like, oh, this recipe is terrible. It doesn't turn out, right? So some of the recipe fails are people trying to substitute out ingredients, people that, they're like, oh, I hate this ingredient. I'm just going to take it out. But sometimes when you just take something out of the recipe, you're taking volume out. So say I'm going to make cookies, but I don't like eating sugar. I'll just take the sugar out. Okay, you need to replace it with something, right? Because that is a mass that is now not in the recipe. So now you're losing, binding properties. You're losing potentially the creating of those crispy sides and that sort of nice gooey caramelly flavor to your cookie because you took your sugar out. So, just eat cardboard, I guess. But we get a lot of times where people are like, oh, can you make this for me? And I need it to be gluten-free and vegan and dairy-free and sugar-free. And I'm just like, I can only take so many things out of the recipe before it's not going to taste good anymore. So, let's check it a little bit here. Let's take it down a notch. The other thing too is, when people develop a recipe, say they've used something specific. So they put on the recipe, 1/4 cup of flour, but they don't tell you that they're using cake flour or bread flour or double O flour or yada, yada, yada. I'm using the stuff that has, that's not non-brominated flour, like whatever it is. If they're not being specific in the recipe for stuff like that, again, you as somebody that's making it at home is going to fail at that recipe. So sometimes when you fail at a recipe, it's not your fault. If you're willy-nilly taking stuff out of the recipe, it is your fault. So let's make sure that we know the difference between the two. The other thing that I found really interesting, so when I originally went to Melissa Copel's chocolate atelier, her chocolate school, it was very interesting because one of the things that she said right on day one was, I will give you my recipes. They are my best recipes, and I have not left anything out. One of her things that she had noticed in her time going to other chocolate training schools, academies, workshops, and stuff like that was you would have these chefs, they were very high up in the chefy world, big white tall hats doing their thing. And they would purposefully leave either instructions out or be incomplete in the instructions, or leave out an ingredient, or put a wrong amount for an ingredient, because they did not want you to be recreating their recipes. They wanted to have you come to their class for sure. They wanted your money for sure, but they didn't want you to actually be successful with their recipes. And, she kind of talked about this tendency for, when you would be in a course and be like, oh yeah, that recipe there. It says 20 grams, it's 30, and then start rattling off all the changes, and people be like, what the heck? Like, why did you put the recipe like this? So she was very specific on her recipes, but she was also giving us her best recipes because she wanted us to be successful. And when you take, so say the recipe is for a fruit caramel. You're making cherry fruit caramel. So it's a caramel cherry flavored. I'm thinking of that right now just because I literally just ate a cherry caramel from Caramels by Callie. It was delicious. But I can't take that recipe and say, I'm not going to use cherries. I'm going to use apples, right? You can't just switch an ingredient out, right? Apples have lots of pectin in them, right? Apples have more fibrous stuff in them. Apples have, depending on the type of apple, they might have more, they might have less sugar, right? So you can't just switch things out like that as well and think that the recipe would be successful. So one of the things that she taught us was, here's the recipe. So say it is a recipe for cherry caramels. If you want to make it with apples, you are going to need to figure out. So we've got all the percentages here, because she did everything in percentages as well, which is very cool. So everything was measured out, but also percentages. So then if you're like, okay, there's 1% of this item in here. Do I want to replace it? Can I replace it? Is it an ingredient that's integral to the recipe? It's the binding agent. And if I don't put that 1% of that binding agent in, I'm just going to have a sloppy recipe, right? So she always would encourage that if you wanted to take something or change something or do that, you can, but you then have to recipe test for it and figure out the substitution, how much, and did something else in the recipe need to be adjusted. So a lot of what she did was, here's the recipe, here's the framework, here's the technique. Now, how do you make it into what you want? So I absolutely love that. I also found it very, very struggling for me. So when I was doing recipe creation, so I used to work somewhere. It's like the 7 pits of hell. I'm not going to say where it was, but needless to say, it was the worst, probably the worst place I've ever worked in the world. The owner was a tyrant. Let's just say it. She was a tyrant. But I did all the recipe creation for all of the locations, of which there was 10 locations. And it was very, very specific in how we created the recipes. So that if somebody was, say, working in a kitchen that was warmer than ours, I would know if they called me and said, this recipe is not working. Okay, what's happening? What's your environment? Oh my gosh, it's like 95 degrees in the kitchen. Okay, that's bad. So I knew for each recipe how to fix it if it wasn't working. And that's a skill that just a lot of people don't have. This has gone wrong. How do I fix it? Now, if you're at home as a home cook, you're probably binning it. You're like, that's it. It didn't work. Into the bin it goes. But for people, that are working professionally in kitchens, if they get recipes that aren't working and are not being successful with, well, they've got to very quickly figure out why, because you cannot be throwing out that amount of food. Okay. So that's something that kind of, bugs me is when somebody creates a recipe and they don't understand, they don't understand the technique of the recipe as well. I don't know why I have the hiccups right now. I'm thinking about food. And then the next thing that I kind of wanted to say with this, which might be, I'm looking at my notes here. One of the last points, using ingredients that are either super expensive, don't add anything to the recipe, or are ingredients that people can't get. Now, hear me out on this. It is fun to try new recipes. Like, I enjoy trying new things. It's fun to kind of search around sometimes for these ingredients. If you're like, oh, I have never heard of this ingredient before, I'd like to actually go and find it and try working with it. That's great. But when you are somebody that is putting cookbooks out, to me, and I want to say to all of you cookbook writers, I love you. I obviously have a million cookbooks in my house because it's my joy. I'm not making stuff necessarily from these books, but I love them so much. I love the stories. I love the recipes. I love going through it. But first point, ingredients that are super expensive. Why? If somebody can get something that is affordable, let them get the affordable ingredient and put the expensive one as if you want to try. So you got a recipe, you're making something with mushrooms. Do not put lobster mushrooms, oyster mushrooms, chanterelles, right, as your mushroom. Put the brown mushroom or the white mushroom, and then we love to make this with morel mushrooms, right? To me, that makes more sense because you're going to the grocery store, what are you finding? The white mushrooms and the brown mushrooms. It is, we were just somewhere today and they had shiitake mushrooms. I haven't seen shiitake mushrooms for a long time, and they actually had them. I was like, fantastic. This is great. This would be a fun seasonal thing to do, right? I'm making mushroom soup. I'm going to use these mushrooms. So that's the first thing. Second thing, adding in ingredients that add nothing to the recipe except for expense. So I always, whenever I'm creating recipes and doing recipes, I look at the ingredient. If I add in, say I added in elderberries. Let's just randomly take elderberries. Pretty distinct flavor. But if I have made a Saskatoon rhubarb and cherry compote and I'm like extract of elderberries in, am I actually tasting this elderberry? If it is adding, and it is a component that will be missed, that's one thing. But if I'm just like, I'm just going to make this recipe fancy, you should add elderberries to it. In fact, it's going to be a main ingredient. Don't do that. Okay. Make sure the ingredients are there for a purpose. Adding in a bunch of superfoods. I'm going to add in all these superfoods that cost me a lot of money, but I can't actually distinguish any of the flavors. That's not good practice as well. And then the third one is creating recipes for ingredients that are just simply unavailable. Now, here is the thing. If I buy a cookbook it's over there. I have a book that's a chocolate book, and it is written by a guy from Spain. And there are a lot of ingredients in that book that even me, with having the most random of all the ingredients, like I pretty much have everything. Jason went and purchased trehalose on an online website the other day, and he's like, oh, I just got trehalose. And I'm like, I have 900 grams of that in the kitchen. He's like, why? I'm like, I don't know. I have random ingredients in the kitchen. So he's got to return it now because why would you buy some when I have 900 grams of it? But I specifically bought that cookbook knowing full well, as somebody that collects cookbooks, loves cookbooks, is a chef, does the chocolating thing, that there was going to be a lot of ingredients in there that I will probably never be able to get. But I bought it because I wanted to see some of the things that they use. I wanted to see some of the ingredients that they would use in Spain that I would not necessarily be able to find here. More of it's lifelong learning, right? I love lifelong learning. So that's fun for me. But for you, if you're at home and you're doing you're cooking at home and you get this cookbook, maybe you buy it or it's gifted to you, and you suddenly realize that the majority of the recipes have ingredients that are unavailable, this is going to be very frustrating. So last thing, season to taste. So I actually started reading this book the other day, How to Taste by Becky Selingut. And she's my people right here. The whole book is how to taste. So developing, because we're going to be doing this super taster thing. So I'm actually taking quite a bit from this book because she goes through the like umami, bitter, salty, sweet, and sour, and all those tastes. So like our big tastes and how to train for that. And then she has all sorts of really fun tidbits and hints and this and that. But her opening chapter made me giggle. And the first thing she says is, when the recipe writer puts season to taste, it's lazy. And it is. It really is. Because here's the thing. Season to taste, I mean, okay, season to taste for chili, for spicy, right? Or for salt and pepper. Okay, but when do you add it in to what you're making? Because it makes a difference when you add aromatic spices, woody spices, things that are very pungent, things that are very sour. It makes a difference when you add them in. So if you kind of leave your customer who has bought your cookbook with season to taste, like, my goodness, put a little more effort in than that. And not everybody, if I'm making the recipe for the first time, I've got no idea what it's supposed to taste like. So I need a bit more guidance than season to taste. So I really I giggled with this first part of her book because it's quite true. And again, wanting people to be successful with the recipes. Yeah, I want you to be successful with the recipes. So I think that is all of the things. So why recipes fail? It's not you, but if you just take stuff out willy-nilly, then it's 100% you. You are the problem. But it happens more than you think. And honestly, with cookbooks that come out, and they have these big mistakes in them, I can't understand it. Like, again, like I said, how many people edited and reviewed and proofread and did not notice that this poor lavender creme brulee recipe in Joshua Wiseman's book had no sugar in the recipe. So, and all of this stemmed from finding where Jason's mom's oatmeal cake recipe came from, and we still have no idea. Originally, I thought it was something as simple as the recipe came from the Quaker Oats box, because, a lot of times they have recipes on like Quaker Oats box, or like when you buy like Chippets and they have the recipe on the Chippets for chocolate chip cookies, or Toll House for the Toll House cookies. But Quaker Oats actually has on their website their historic recipes as well. So it was not from there. So we still weren't able to figure out where it was from, which is totally okay. It is a mystery that we get to enjoy this delicious cake, not just for birthdays, but for any time that we want. So with that is the end of my rant. Oh my gosh, if you stayed to the end, I'm so proud of you. We have, like I said, we got a bunch of guest interviews coming up. Very excited about that. I've almost finished putting together the sensory training, aroma training that we're going to do. So hopefully I'll be able to start that in like a couple of weeks and start putting out some content about that. If there's anything you guys want to know, have you had recipes that just don't work and you're sad? Or you've had recipes where you're like, why are all these ingredients in there? What the heck is this? Let me know. Put in the comments, subscribe, tell all your friends, wherever you're at. We are on a long weekend this weekend. So if you're on a long weekend, happy long weekend. If you're not, pretend it's a long weekend. Call in sick from work. Don't do that. I'll get in trouble. You'll be like, Colleen said I can call in sick because I'm supposed to make every day a long weekend. Yeah, don't do that. But have a great one, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.